is about reading and thinking critically. So what we will cover today, I'll start with a few questions, and you're welcome to volunteer to answer them. I will show you two perspectives of reading a text critically, and then we will consider how we read a text usually. I will try to explain what critical thinking is and the different situations where we use or where we should use critical thinking skills. And there are three methods that I've shared with you, and I will end with some useful tips. Okay, so let's begin with the questions. Can you all see the questions?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so how do you read a text? What do you look for when you're reading a text? Okay, that's the first question. And then, why is critical reading necessary? Is it because a text is semantically flawed? So what I'm trying to say is, do we critically read a text because it's semantically flawed, as in the meaning is flawed, or we use critical thinking to form a judgment? So do you need to be critical of what you read, or you are critically examining something, analyzing something? And the last question is, should we bring any preconceived notions? So preconceived notions or ideas that we had before we read it, okay, before we read the text. So should we bring any preconceived notions or pre-reading knowledge about the topic? Any question you would like to answer? No one?
Can I answer?
Yes, of course.
Well, I will answer the first question. What I look for a text is the topic sentence, and then I jump into the conclusion, and then I will try to look for details by not diving into the text, but just examine it from the outside, and then after that I will read the text, all of it.
Okay, so good.
So I do it because I want to test my knowledge. Do I know anything about this topic, or I don't?
Okay, thank you very
Yes.
much.
You're
That's
welcome.
definitely one way of looking at it. So when we do critical reading, is it because a text is flawed, like there are problems with it, or are we doing critical reading because we would like to further analyze it?
I think further analyze it.
Okay, that's definitely it. Yes. Not necessarily, I mean, we critically read something which is wonderfully written, content-wise, language-wise. So it's nothing to do with being flawed. It can be flawed, but it's not really for that reason. So we critique it. And the last question, should we bring our prior knowledge of the theme that we are reading about?
I think yes, we should. It will help us more understand the text, I guess.
Okay. You're right in a way that, it will help us to understand the text. But sometimes when we are trying to be objective, we can leave the subjective part of our understanding aside. But we will use it definitely. Okay, so we will use it. But thank you very much for participating. I'll move on to the next slide. Now, reading a text critically, when I read a text, I consider two things. One is the writer's perspective. The other one is the reader's perspective. So somebody wrote that piece of text, that article, the chapter, the book that we are reading, okay? So the writer had a perspective, and now I, as a reader, I have a perspective too. Does anyone want to share any thought that you might have about it, about the reader's perspective? So you are a reader. How do you see it? Like, what would be your angle when you read something? Okay, so let me share my thoughts. I'm myself also a writer and a published writer. So when I write something for my readers, I would want them to like it, to accept it as much as possible. If I give my own opinion, I will have to back it up with evidence, facts, or reasoning. Okay, so suppose it is not based on facts but my own thought, but it has to be, I have to arrive at something which sounds logical, sound thought, etc. So I have a perspective that when I write, I want my readers to like it and to reach as many readers as possible, as well as for that to be acceptable. Now, the reader has a perspective. The reader may like it, may not like it, but even if the reader doesn't like it, will probably think, okay, it is written in such a way that it's persuasive. Okay, so that's what we want. And that's what, as a reader, we will try to, so the writing, if it is persuasive, we will have to take that into account. So we have to have an open mind. What I'm trying to say is, what the writer has written, maybe I do not fully accept everything. But if I have an open mind, I will see the writer's point of view. And when we critically consider something, we really have to see the writer's point of view, okay? So even if we disagree, then we have to give our own logic, our own explanation why we are disagreeing. But first we have to evaluate in such a way that the writer's points, perspective, those are brought out. Okay, so two things for us to consider. The writer has written something and how it is reaching me as a reader. How am I accepting it or not? Am I agreeing with it? Am I disagreeing with it? So that's there. So how do you read? Now, I would like you to look at the questions. One is A, as language learners, you're actually grappling with both the content and with the language. Okay, so the content is the semantics, the meaning that it conveys, the language is the syntax. Okay, so we are trying to figure out the language, the vocabulary, the structure, etc., as well as the meaning that it conveys. Now, if I were to ask you, which one should you prioritize when you're critically reading something? Do you prioritize the language learning or do you prioritize the content? So, one of the, you have read the reading strategies, you have done reading strategies in semester 1, in semester 2. So, and in semester 2, you're doing it. So, what to look for, how do you read? You may not understand the word or the vocabulary, but you look at the whole thing and the sentences before and after, that. But then, when you're critically reading, which one should you prioritize? So I have a set of questions here. The first one is, do you read actively? Which means, are you fully focused when you read about the entire text? Do you engage with the text you're reading? How do you engage? You're thinking about the writer's perspective. And do you want to learn about what you read, or just, okay, let me read, let me answer the questions and let me get on with it? So that is one way of doing it, okay? Now, so we read actively, we also read passively. Passively is when we are looking for, when we do skim reading, scan reading. To me, that is kind of passive reading because we are trying to answer the questions or look for a certain information, okay? So, but however, whether we actively read or passively read, the intention should be to learn something. And the only way to learn is to read actively. So here are questions. Do you read actively, passively? And now I move on to what is critical thinking. So critical thinking as an extension of critical reading. So this is basically based on a definition of what critical thinking is. And of course, it's a big area, but I've tried to simplify it so that we can, whatever we can discuss within the scope of the workshop. So the first thing is analytical reading. Okay, that's one of the things. So how do we analyze? When we analyze, we have to be objective. So even if we have certain bias, prejudice, personal impressions, whatever it is, subjective impressions, we put that aside. We look at the text objectively. What is the writer trying to say? Then we evaluate the argument that the writer has presented. Okay, so evaluation. Analyze, then evaluate, which means weigh. Good, bad, different perspective, different sides, different angles. And that helps us to form a judgment about the text. So that is why I think I did say that, we have to be open-minded to process what we are learning without bias, without prejudice. And if we don't have an open mind, then that is likely to cloud our judgment of the text we are critically reading. And if we allow ourselves to cloud our judgment, then it will interfere with our critical thinking about the text. Now here are some kind of pointers when we read a text, or how we read a text, or how we should read a text rather. So first is, reader has to engage with the text. So the first question I've written is, why was it written? Which means we have to recognize the writer's purpose. What is the writer trying to say? Okay, so why was it written? Second one is, what is written? So what is the main argument or the central theme or the subject matter, okay? When you write writing assignments, you begin with a topic sentence, and it basically is an introduction to the main argument. So what is written? What is being written, or what is written? And the other question is, how is it written? So how means the style, the particular style that the writer has adopted, okay? So there is definitely a reason for a particular style that the writer does. And an established writer obviously, considers and carefully decides what kind of style to adopt. Now, so you can ask yourself, what is the writer doing? Is he trying to inform? Is he or she trying to inform us? So inform, how do you inform? With facts, okay? It could be about scientific experiment, it could be factual evidence. So, or is the writer trying to persuade us to his or her way of thinking, or trying to clarify or create food for thought? Now, food for thought is very important. So it leads to further understanding. So just creating food for thought is introducing a topic in a comprehensive way and letting you form your own opinion. So not really directly influencing you, but in a way, sort of, yes. So the second one is reflect. Okay, so that's important. We need to reflect. How do we reflect? I can tell you how I reflect. I try to think, is the argument or viewpoint presented sound? Is it logical? Is it credible? Can there be another acceptable or credible viewpoint? Am I satisfied with what the writer says? And do I feel that I can challenge the argument? If I feel that the argument that the writer presents needs to be challenged, then if so, on what grounds, okay? And then that leads to formation of new knowledge. So formation of new knowledge, or creating new knowledge through engagement that we have been talking about, through reflection. So I or we can challenge the content to make new meaning. If we disagree, how do we deal with disagreement? We have to explain. How do we explain? We have to reason. So if I disagree, I have to give reasoning for it, a logical, sound reasoning why I disagree. And that is one of the elements of critical thinking. Now, and then we can interpret the deeper implication. Okay, so there's a surface meaning that's easy to read, but there's a deeper implication for that. So how do we interpret it? That's important. And then that in that way we can arrive at advanced understanding or advance our understanding of the text. So in a way, start thinking beyond the text which is given to us. Okay, so we start thinking beyond it. I would like to briefly pause for you to ask me any questions if you have any. No? Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so I thought of 3 situations. And there can be several, but I thought of 3 situations which apply to students of this college, of this university. One is when we do critical reading during assessment, which means the scheduled time you have for a quiz, midterm, final exam. So we schedule a time for you, and within the scope of that exam or quiz, you have to critically read. Okay, one of the things which is, I think, easy in the sense, if I want to use the word easy, is that you have MCQs, okay, to select from. So you're not really writing, thinking and writing. You have limited time. You just select the most appropriate answer. So during assessment, how do you critically read? So you're reading for a particular purpose, which is to answer the questions correctly and get full marks. And so for that, during assessment, I'm looking at the first column here. One of the things is SQ3R. Have you ever heard of SQ3R? It's quite common and famous. Has anyone heard of SQ3R?
Okay. Yes.
You have. Okay. Would you like to say something about it, or you?
It was very useful for my SATs.
Okay.
It was easy to critically read long essays.
Okay, good. For those of you who haven't used SQ3R, it's actually a reading comprehension method for different reading purposes. Okay, so the first one, SQ3R, first one stands for survey. Now, this is something that you always do. You during an exam, you speed read, you scan read, you skim read for particular information. And then number 2 is question. Number 3, read. 4, recite. 5, review. Now, I'm not going to explain this. The reason being, if you do a Google search after my workshop, you can find SQ3R, lot of information. And something which is very easily and simply written is from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. So you can, I've given you the link. If you go there, you can see. So I don't want to spend time on that because this information is easily available. But this is something useful when you are trying to answer the questions during your, quiz, midterm exams and final exam. The second one, the second situation is when we reading for reasoning, for our research. Okay, so to write your assignment or beyond, the scope of assessment, timed assessment. So again, I would say for this, you need to use the SQ3R. But firstly, there's a pre-reading. I would say have a dictionary handy, find out the meaning of unknown and unfamiliar words. And then while you read, underline, tick mark, okay, the sentences that seem challenging. Paraphrase, you know how to paraphrase key points for retention, and then use the SQ3R method. But it's highly advisable that when you use SQ3R, please, we are required to train our mind to learn while reading. So we're not just reading because we have to answer the questions during an exam, but we have to train our mind to learn. Because if we don't learn, what we read is just a waste of time, really. Okay, the third one, I actually didn't know much about it, although I'd heard about it, but I did a quick research for this workshop, and I thought that would be useful for many of you, since we are in a College of Science and Health Professions. This is to do with scientific investigation. So any subject from the science discipline is used, and this is a very new method which was developed in 2017, so 4 years ago, and developed by Mahanal and Zubaida. And it is called the Ricostre. Okay, it's an acronym, Ricostre Learning Model. It's a problem-based learning model. So when you're doing investigation or research for your science-based courses, I think this is something very, very important. And a lot of research has been done since this model was developed. And the students who were given to use this learning model, it's a problem-based. So when they were given to use this learning model, their critical learning and critical thinking skills really increased a lot. They were very successful in demonstrating how they have learned. So those who have not yet started or used it, I would suggest have a look. And if you want more information, I can send a link or send an article later on that. Any questions so far? Is it okay? I hope I'm not going too fast. Okay, next one. So here there are some useful tips to grasp the meaning as fully as possible. Okay, so there are two things that we always look at. One is the language, another is the content. Okay, it's the language, syntax. You are marked on your lexical proficiency, on the syntax, you're always marked. So there's a rubric where we take into account how well you are demonstrating the language, your language proficiency skills. So when we read, we are actually looking at the language of the writer as well. And through the language, we can figure out what is being said. Now, so there's a surface feature, okay? That's the form, the way it is written, the style in which it was written. It can be written, the last point that I have is something I'm going to mention first. So is the tone of the writer impersonal? Okay, is it passive or is it first person active? And at the moment, I know those who are doing semester 2, that you're doing the passive in the grammar course. So that is, and as you know, the different skills are all tied together. So we just don't teach you the passive because it's part of grammar, but also when it is used in writing, why is it used in writing? Okay. Is it because we don't have enough information, or is it because we are withholding? The writer deliberately is withholding the information and getting the readers to think about it. So if it is written in the passive form, if it's impersonal, is the writer trying to influence you in what way? Think about all those things, okay? So, and then of course, the first one that I mentioned, the style and structure, mentioned that. The vocabulary. Now, as you know, words can be used in multiple ways. Okay, so one word can have different meaning. Again, the same word can be used in a text in different ways and sort of various stages of the text. So be mindful of that. Think about the subject, okay, in a sentence or a text. Who is the person who is performing? Who is the subject? Like we understand the subject and the verb of a sentence. So who is doing it? The doer of the action, and what is being done. Those things are also important. We just don't teach you now about noun and subject and verb. But in a sentence, that's important always also to find out. So you can get the drift of the writer in a way. The next one is the content. Okay, so these are also useful to grasp the meaning as fully as possible. So the meaning is, the external meaning is there through the language, but there's an implicit meaning. Implicit meaning is the underlying meaning, the meaning which is concealed through the way it is written. And so those are the deep-seated thoughts of the writer. The writer is probably not sharing everything with you, but there's enough indication by not sharing what he is actually trying to say. So this sort of implicit meaning leads to deeper inquiry, and it gives rise to different ideas and, you know, diversity ideas and meanings, etc. So when we do that, when we are reading or trying to figure out what lies beneath the lines, you know. So reading beneath the lines, we have to be rational, objective. We need to reflect. What is reflection? Sort of proactively engage with the text to formulate our opinion, as well as feeling. So how do we feel when we are reading it? We are feeling positive about it. We are feeling not so positive about it, or very negative about it, or just apathy, indifference. Okay, so we are just reading to figure out what actually is the writer saying. Sometimes when we read something, we immediately like what we are reading. Sometimes we are not sure what we are thinking about it. So, you know, so we need to reflect basically and engage with the text. The next point is we look for issues that have no definite answers. So there are sort of maybe a set of questions or kind of introducing ideas without giving definite answer. So that's something we need to look at. And then I have written compare and contrast with other writings on the subject. That's something when you're critically evaluating, because one of you did say that you do bring your, you know, the subjective element, the pre-knowledge. So yes, you do bring. You objectively analyze, but you also bring what you already know. So how do you compare and contrast? Then for you as a reader to critically think, you need to be confident to use your own examples. Okay, your own examples or your own experience, if that is applicable. So if you have had a similar experience, but the consequence or the result was different, so be confident to use it, to share it, as you are giving a critical opinion. When you have MCQs, obviously you can't, but you know, in your research, in your assignment, yes, when you write your essay for a semester 3, when you do your research papers, all these techniques will come in, or skills will come in handy. And then decide what to believe and what to do with your decision. Now, this I have explained in the next slide, but for now, let's look at that. So we are going to decide what to believe. So you are the critical reader, okay? While you have reflected and engaged with the text, you come to a point where you have to decide what you actually believe about it, and what you will do with your decision. Okay, and I will explain that further later on in the next slide. And then you need to organize your thoughts for your own argument about the text. And then finally, successfully accommodate new ideas or viewpoint to create new meaning. New meaning or input is your own input, the reader's critical input, okay? After having considered different angles, different viewpoints, you're now about to create a new meaning, which is your own opinion. And that is why when you write an essay or research paper, your own work, your own reflections are very, very important. Okay, so we read different research papers, different articles, but our input is what we write, is we are creating new information, we are creating new meaning. And you know that we know what plagiarism is. And we don't want our students to just repeat what somebody has said. So if somebody else says, you repeat it, it's not really critical thinking. So this last point is very important: successfully accommodate new ideas or viewpoint to create new knowledge, new meaning. Okay, so this point where I'm pointing, I don't know whether you can see, decide what to believe and what to do with your decision. And this is what I'm going to explain now. So this is based on based on a diagram which was provided by Robert H. Ennis in 1985. He wrote an article, or his research was in educational leadership. Okay, so this is what he said. He said, and I've just sort of summarized it, that when our decision what to believe or do after reading a text depends on clarity of thought and understanding. So we must be clear what we have understood, how we have understood it. And we have to be critically disposed. Okay, so what is critical thinking, or what are critical thinking dispositions? These are the ones. One is deduction, one is induction, one is inference. And you know, when you do critical thinking exercises for reading, there is always an inference question. Now, deduction is when you're drawing conclusion, or rather the process of using logic to form a conclusion or an opinion. That's deduction. Okay, you deduce the information. You deduce from the information that is given. And then induction is introducing a new idea, which is your own input, or even the writer's induction. What new idea has the writer introduced? And the inference. So you reach a conclusion on the basis of the reasoning and the facts and the evidence provided, okay, in the text. So the inference, again, depends on information from others, like, you know, when you're interacting with people, information from your observation, your experience looking around, and the acceptable conclusion that you reach. All that is inference. Okay, these are different components or elements of inference. Now, again, you see the arrow, this arrow goes upwards, which means all this inference is possible through interaction with other people and through problem solving. So which means problem solving, you can say analysis of an issue. Okay, so you have an issue, a theme, a subject matter, you have analyzed it, that's actually problem solving. So I would like to pause for a minute for you to look at the screen, and, you know, if you want to ask me any questions, please do so. Okay, now questions, I suppose. And now I will, before we conclude, I'm going to go through the ricosse method with you. Remember, I'll go back to the slide where I have mentioned it, this one, okay? So the scientific investigation ricosse learning model, which is a problem-based learning model, developed in 2017. So I have prepared a few slides on that for you to understand. So you see which way the arrow is going from left to right. Okay, so the first one is reading, that's important. Then identify the problem. Now, bear in mind that this is used for scientific investigation usually, but that can be used for literature, language as well. How? So instead of identifying a problem, you can say identifying the theme, the subject matter, the issue. Okay, so that works well as well. Construct solution, and I will explain these further. Solve problem, review problem solving. So after solving the problem, you review. And after reviewing it, you extend your review. So extend the problem solving, which means see the methods that were used, whether they work or not. If they work, then you can apply it to other research topics. Now here, every stage, so there are 6 stages. These 6 stages are meant to help you to apply higher order thinking. Okay, so that's important. So I'll come to the first point, or a component rather, which is reading. So those who developed this model said that when we critically read, we express what is in the text and go through a process to construct meaning. So we are expression of what is in the text, okay? That's writer's perspective. So we have the writer's perspective, which is expression of what is in the text. When we critically read, we are expressing that, the writer's perspective. And also we attempt to construct meaning, which means we go through the process of understanding or constructing new meaning. So that's the reader's perspective. And so when we read, what do we do? We observe, we focus, we perceive, okay? Perceive is thinking beyond the scope of the text. Memorize certain information, because if that is completely new and unfamiliar, we would like to remember it. And here memorization does not really mean like, word for word, but just memorizing the idea, remembering the idea, or retention rather. But they have used the word memorize. We analyze, okay? We interpret after analyzing it, which means looking at it objectively. We are trying to figure out and saying what the writer is saying. So that's we interpret. And the final one is build connections. Build connections means obviously the change in our attitude as readers when we are forming an opinion. So that's the reading component of Ricostre model. The second one is identifying a problem. So they have said problem, and I have used issue of theme because that's what you do in semester 1 and 2 and 3 for reading. So how do you identify an issue or a theme? The process of problem solving. So what is it about, okay? Identify an unclear and unstructured problem. So, which means maybe you're looking for clarity. Basically, the second point is you're looking for clarity, and you're looking to give structure or form to something that you're grappling with, okay? Formulate questions to solve the identified problem. And again, this is those who have started science courses, this will be helpful to you. Formulate questions to solve the identified problem. And the last one is formulating and asking questions about what you read, okay, or about what you're investigating, the research project that you have. And when you formulate and ask questions, you are asking questions. This is part of critical thinking skill. So it indicates that you're critically thinking. And all these skills are transferable. So when we apply it, this last point, when we apply it for reading in our reading course, what do? You're looking at the heading, the subheading, or the title, the words, the vocabulary which are given in bold face, etc. And you're thinking, okay, why has this been given? Why is this being highlighted? What is the meaning of that? Okay, so that is when you're formulating and asking questions, which you do in a scientific investigation, which you will do for your own research, and which we do actually when we are reading text for our reading course, in our reading course. So we ask questions. If you're not asking questions, which means you're reading it passively, you're not reading it actively, you're not reading critically. Number 3, constructing the solution. So now you have to solve the problem, okay, the issue, the theme that you were investigating. So these are the three strategies that they have given, or the three components. Please read through it. Okay, so the first one says find additional strategy, okay, to solve the problem. And they have advised or recommended that every strategy should include detailed procedure on how to solve the problem. So if you're thinking in terms of a reading course, okay, so figure out when we are reading something, what are we trying to find out for our assignment, for our essay research paper? What are we trying to find out? What procedures? Maybe the procedures you use are paraphrasing, summarizing, but then, there are procedures that you use. So that's an important element, however you use it. And the next one is, or the last one, the activity is an effort to provide responses to the inquiries. By doing so, you are finding responses to the questions that you have asked yourself. So this is trying to arrive at a solution. This is probably difficult at this stage for you to understand. I don't know, but those who have used it in science-based courses or projects may find it useful at a later stage. Solving the problem, okay? So you've already used the procedures, and now, having used the procedures, you implement those procedures, which you have introduced in the previous stage. So thinking skill at this stage is very important because you're processing the information, you're organizing your thoughts, you're deducing the meaning, and you're exploring knowledge based on experience, based on observation. Review the problem that you have solved. So you have arrived at a conclusion. Review it. Review, see what you have written, see what you have found out, okay? So when you review it because you will be given a feedback, and probably you have to give a feedback, which is your own response. Now this last bit, and also to widen the information from the research or the investigation. Now this last point is very important. This is my own input. So think of diagnostic questions and keep them in mind. What are diagnostic questions? Analytical questions, questions that you have been asking yourself to investigate, or research the topic, okay? And that's the last one in the Ricostre, the last stage in the Ricostre method. So you have reviewed it. Now you will extend what you have reviewed. So extend the problem solving. Analyze how effective and efficient the strategy was, whether you're ready to apply new knowledge, create new meaning, and skills which you have obtained from going through this problem or procedure, and you are now creating new meaning, which is your own input. So by that, and the last one is that by this time you have understood the nature of the problem or the subject matter, and you have developed the skills to unravel it, to disentangle or explain what you have been reading and researching painstakingly. So now you've done all that. So this is the last stage of the Ricostre method, and I am almost towards the end of the workshop. So students and those participating, was that useful, and do you have any questions?
Yes, that was useful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you anyone any question, or do you want me to go to any particular slide, go back to it and explain?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for your patience and for attending, and for those who participated, thank you very much. I'm still here if you want to ask me anything. Thinking and reading critically, thinking critically is actually a vast subject, really. So if you want further help, probably I can think of another workshop in the future. But for now, this was introducing the topic and giving you enough useful tips that you can use in your exam and for further research. Okay, well, thank you very much. If there's nothing that you would like to answer, so we can, Ala, I think we can end the session, right?
Yes, there's no question, so we can end it.
Okay.
We really can thank you, express our thanks to you, Ms. Shiban, and we appreciate you, your support, your effort to conduct this workshop. Even you are sick, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.